You think you know English history, all those kings, queens, and epic battles. But what if I told you that the real story, the one that tells you everything, can be found on a dinner plate? Today, we're going to dive into how centuries of conquest, class, and empire have cooked up the modern English diet.
It seems like a simple question, doesn't it? But the answer is this huge, sprawling saga. A country's diet is kind of like its secret diary. It reveals everything: military takeovers, deep-seated class divides, the rise of global trade. And trust me, England's food diary is one of the most dramatic you'll ever read.
All right, so where does our story begin? Not in a cozy English kitchen, but with the Roman legions. Their invasion back in 43 AD wasn't just about swords and sandals. It was the first great globalization of the British diet. It completely and permanently changed everything.
I mean, just look at this. The sheer scale of what they brought over is incredible. Before the Romans showed up, the local diet was pretty basic. But the Romans didn't just bring their armies, they brought their entire garden with them. We're talking about cabbages, onions, cherries, grapes, and so much more. This wasn't just a few new menu items, they were reshaping the land itself. They even planted the very first vineyards in Britain. No Romans, no English wine. Simple as that.
Okay, so after the Romans left, a pretty stark social divide starts to creep in. And when the Normans conquered England in 1066, that divide became a canyon. This slide shows it perfectly. On one side, you have the rich feasting on roast swan, exotic spices, and white bread. On the other, the poor are surviving on pottage, basically a thick vegetable sludge, and whatever they could forage. Food was the ultimate status symbol. And get this, you can still hear this power dynamic in our language today. The animals in the field kept their English names: cow, pig, sheep. But once they were cooked and served to the French-speaking lords, they became beef, pork, and mutton. It's like a thousand-year-old echo of who was serving whom.
The next big shakeup came when ships started sailing to new worlds. They came back with ingredients that would totally redefine wealth, power, and, of course, dessert. Man, the Tudor era was a flavor explosion. You've got these brand new foods arriving from the Americas, like turkey and the potato. But the real game changer, the ingredient that turned everything upside down, was sugar. It went from being this incredibly rare, expensive medicine to the ultimate status symbol. If you were rich, you flaunted it with sugar.
And this obsession with sugar, well, it had some pretty visible side effects. This quote you're reading is a description of none other than Queen Elizabeth I. Her court consumed so much sugar in these huge, elaborate sculptures and desserts that it literally rotted her teeth black. And the crazy part? That was seen as a sign of wealth. It meant you were powerful enough to afford the stuff that destroyed your teeth. Why?
So all this global trade wasn't just introducing new tastes. It was generating the massive wealth that would fuel an even bigger change. As we roll into the 18th and 19th centuries, millions of people are moving from farms into crowded cities for the Industrial Revolution. And this creates a huge new problem. How do you feed all these workers? They need food that's cheap, fast, and packed with calories. The answer would become a national icon.
See, fish and chips weren't just invented by one person in a lab. It was more like a perfect storm of history. You had Jewish immigrants bringing their tradition of frying fish. You had the humble potato chip becoming a super cheap and popular street food. But the secret ingredient that made it all possible? Technology. Steam trains meant you could get fresh fish from the coast into cities deep inland fast. And in the 1860s, some genius finally put the two together, and boom, the Chippy was born.
And we know for a fact that chips were becoming a big deal around this time. Here's a quote from Charles Dickens himself, talking about husky chips of potato. This shows they were already a common sight on the streets of London, just waiting for their perfect partner. At the exact same time, another food revolution was quietly brewing, and this one was powered by the full might of the British Empire. The numbers here are just staggering. In 1 year, from one city, Shanghai, Britain imported over 31 million pounds of tea. It's this colossal scale of trade that turned tea from a fancy drink for aristocrats into a daily necessity for literally everyone.
The British Empire didn't just conquer lands, it conquered kitchens. The whole national diet was now built on these complex and often pretty brutal colonial supply chains. Think about that classic cup of tea, the symbol of Britishness. The tea itself was from India, and it was sweetened with sugar harvested by enslaved people in the Caribbean. You've got versions of Indian curry becoming popular, chocolate from the Americas becoming a household treat. The empire was quite literally on the plate.
All right, let's bring it into the 20th century, which was a real roller coaster. We go from the extreme scarcity of wartime rationing all the way to the incredible multicultural food scene that you see in Britain today.
So for a big chunk of the 20th century, English food got this, let's say, unfortunate reputation for being bland, right? But how did that even happen after centuries of absorbing all these amazing global flavors? Well, the answer for the most part lies in the devastation of 2 world wars.
During World War II, things got incredibly tough. The government had to ration almost everything to make sure there was enough to go around. But there was one very famous exception: fish and chips. The government knew this hot, cheap, filling meal was absolutely vital for morale on the home front, so they kept it off the ration list. And that act basically cemented the dish as a fundamental part of the national identity.
But of course, things change. Just look at this chart. In the 1930s, there were about 35,000 chippies across the country. By 2009, that number had dropped to around 10,000. It's not that people fell out of love with fish and chips, it's that the whole food landscape was changing, with new competition and new tastes arriving from all over the world.
And that brings us right up to today. The story of English food has always been a story of migration. Just like the Romans brought cherries and Jewish immigrants brought fried fish, post-war migration, especially from South Asia, transformed the British palate all over again. Today, you'll find a lot of people who will argue that a dish like chicken tikka masala has just as much of a claim, if not more, to being Britain's national dish.
So if there's one thing we can take away from all this, it's that what people eat in England has never been a fixed thing. It is a constant story of absorbing, adapting, and changing. Which leaves us with one last question to chew on. Given its incredible history of evolution, what will the English plate even look like in another 100 years?